Welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Madel, joined as always by Chris Bugay. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Pretty good, Rachel. Well, people often just answer that like pretty good or well without really giving any thoughtful consideration. And I guess I'm not so great this week. I got some bad news this week that has been affecting me. And it's coming off a week prior, which was ridiculously awesome. So the week prior, my wife got a job as an assistant principal, go Melissa, that had been a goal of hers for a long time. Multiple interviews, multiple year process after getting her administrative degree and certificate. So go Melissa. We had a fantastic weekend celebrating that huge accomplishment. She also got in to a doctorate program for educational leadership. So go Melissa. So just awesome time. Followed up with this week when I got an email midweek about a student that I used to work with that I can't be too specific, right? I have to keep it general on the podcast, but has essentially was I'm going to put this in air quotes, a functional AAC user, had in his preschool days, we introduced a robust language system, supported him through the acquisition of some language, eventually plateaued, and I just got some bad news about him that he was going to go to a different setting, and that setting doesn't necessarily embrace the same philosophies that you and I so strongly believe in and profess in this podcast. They don't necessarily adopt an approach to language acquisition that aligns with what we have been doing in the past. And when I got that email and I learned of this situation, it was really, and it still is, really emotional for me because one, I feel like it was on me to prevent that from happening. Not totally me, but I was a principal part of it in trying to help the teams that he's worked with over the years learn about these things that we talk about, all these, aided language stimulation and motor planning and descriptive teaching, and the list goes on. And I know I've put a lot of time and effort into helping that family, helping that student. This is one of the students that I would sit next to and model myself, And so to learn that's changed in a way that does not align with my thinking, and I feel like he's going to go down a path that I can't stop, it's really drummed up some feelings of helplessness, of defeat, of frustration. And I guess it maybe I wouldn't feel so if you put my emotional well-being on a diagram. The week before was so high, being so happy for my wife and her accomplishments, and then this week is crushing. And I'm really making it about me, and I don't mean to. I really mean making it about the student because I'm really scared for him. I'm really scared for him, and I don't know how best to help.
Chris, I feel like we can all relate to this. We've all had the case where it just feels like it's slipping through our hands. And we're what could I have done so that it didn't slip through? And I think that is really hard because I feel like when you work with students closely, you do become emotionally invested in their well-being. And that's why we got into the field that we got into, right? We wanted to help people, and especially working with kids with complex communication needs. It's we know from all of the years of experience that we have, kind of the road to success, happiness, joy, connection, all these things that communication, spontaneous, novel communication generation leads us to. And so it's so hard when we see someone veer off that path that we were responsible for. And you feel helpless. You feel like, what could I have done differently so that this family didn't make those decisions? Maybe I didn't educate them enough. Maybe I didn't include them enough. Maybe I didn't listen enough. And I was trying to just put kind of my priorities down without being an active listener. I'm sure, are you asking yourself all those same questions?
100%. You're in my brain. Get in my brain, Rachel.
We're frequently in each other's brains, I feel like, Chris. But I just feel like it's one of the sad realities of the work that we do, is that like it's not realistic to think that we can 100% of the time change and do, things that end in success. And that's really hard to struggle with. And I feel like, especially for people who dedicate so much of their energy and their life to that goal, when we fall short of that, it feels like a huge disappointment and failure.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been wrestling with for the last couple of days, since I've learned of this information and since the moment of this conversation. As I was, sitting there and wiping the tears out of my eyes of like, what could I have done differently? Exactly. What could I have done differently? There's a lot of things I have done differently. Trying to create a systemic way of approaching AAC and creating a culture around language. I think our steps, a way of looking at coaching. I've certainly dived into coaching over the last couple of years. And when I first was involved with this student, I was not as keyed in on coaching as I was like, let me just tell you how to do this, so those are all things that I wish I could go back and do differently. I can't. Like, there's no turning back the clock. I can do it better for the next student. Maybe these are things that that I can help other people not make the same mistakes. And even if I can't help this particular student right now, maybe my actions in the future can help the next student.
Sometimes when I am faced with situations like this, because we all suffer from disappointment in our lives, and we have moments where things really bad happen in our life, and that's inevitable. That is life, right? I think the best thing we can do is to use all of those moments as opportunities and a catalyst for growth and change. And it's a natural time to reflect back on, for example, this student. And it sounds like that's what you've been doing all week. And figuring out, how can I not have the same trajectory again? What can I do to improve the way that I practice and the tools that I teach and the way that I teach them, to prevent something like this from happening? And I feel like that's all we can do as individuals, as human beings. Like, all we can do is continuing to strive to be better and to do better, and giving ourselves grace, because it doesn't always end in success. That is not life. Life is not just one series of success after success after success. It's the failure that really stimulates growth and change if you allow it. And I think that's part of the process, is being open to the fact that you weren't perfect. You weren't able to do everything that you wanted to do, and that's okay, because realizing your shortcomings is what allows for us to grow and change. Again, if you're open to it. And so I'm sure lots of people listening to this podcast are like, yes, I've been in this exact situation. And I think a lot of SLPs were very empathetic, which is, again, why we got into that field. But it means that we feel stronger than maybe other people. And because of that, it can really weigh heavily. But I think that the silver lining here is to use it as a stimulus to grow and change, and also like to be kind to yourself. Because it doesn't do any of your students any good if you're just in a shame spiral and like feeling really bad about what you've done. It's like, allow yourself to, have your time to kind of feel bad, but then like just say, okay, like what can I do moving forward so that we don't have this outcome anymore? What can I do that's in my control to be better?
One of the things that I've resolved myself to think about is that at the time of this recording, and when this all happened, we're creeping into the end of the school year. And when the end of the school year comes, there's a lot of like teachers that put up countdowns, how many days left. Not a big fan of that strategy, because it's like, hey, how fast can we get out of here? Like, as opposed to, hey, unless it's like countdown to when I'm not going to see you, and it's like a sad thing, like then I could get behind it. But I'm reminded of this. Well, I should say, so I started to wonder, like, and especially this school year, it's been exceptionally difficult for a lot of people because it's been such a unique set of circumstances. I'm kind of looking forward to the end of the year and starting fresh at the beginning of school year. But it's still we've still got at the time of this recording, depending on where you are, in our neck of the woods, it's 6 to 8 weeks left, for the end of the year. And you can't, that's 6 to 8 weeks. And so I say that because my very first year as a speech language pathologist, I remember feeling that way as well. After spring break, right around this time of year, feeling like, oh man, can't wait to get to the end, man. Whew. And I was feeling it now. And my principal in my very first year at a staff meeting said, in this school, we work to the very last minute of the very last day because our kids deserve nothing less. And that stuck with me yeah. And it comes out every year this time. And this was an eye-opening experience for me when I got that email, I can't phone it in on any given day. I can take a break. I can forgive myself. I mean, I hear what you're saying there. I can't just continuously get down on myself for what didn't happen, but I can resolved to spend every minute I can bringing us to the end of this school year with a strong finish, as opposed to kind of limping across the finish line.
Yeah, and I think this just speaks to this notion of the need to find ways to recharge yourself, to recharge your battery. Because I think what happens is we're just so tired and so beaten down, and everyone's like, when's the end of the year? And if we find ways to take care of ourselves so that we are recharged, for me, I work all year round. Unfortunately, I don't have summer break. I work all the time. But I recognize that I need to do certain things for myself where I'm able to disconnect from work and recharge my battery. I'm thinking about two people come to mind, or one is a podcast. The SLP Happy Hour is another podcast. They talk all about self-care. So I definitely recommend checking that podcast out because I think it's important as speech language pathologists, as parents, as teachers, to all figure out ways that we can take care of ourselves, because we're so busy taking care of others. That is our job, right? To take care of others, take care of teaching them, keeping them safe, teaching them how to communicate. So I think that's really important. The other person that came to mind is actually Kara Walton, who's been on our podcast. She shares a lot on social media all about self-care. And I think it's just so important. And I think it's something that I actually have just kind of in the last couple of years started to prioritize, because I was always I don't have time for that. I don't have time for this whole self-care woo-woo stuff. And what I've realized is that we all need to take care of ourselves so that we're able to take care of other people. And so I definitely think that that's part of this. And especially because we're rounding out the end of the school year, you're right, Chris, 6 to 8 weeks is a lot of time that we can spend teaching our kids, and they need us. They need all of those minutes of those days moving the needle for learning and growing and changing. And especially when it comes to kids with complex communication needs, all of that time is really important. And so how can we show up as the best version of ourselves, knowing that we're not always going to be the best version, so giving ourselves grace when we're not, but trying our best to just do the things that we need to do in order to be the best version of ourselves.
Well, I appreciate you talking to me about this, and I appreciate the fact that we have a platform that we can talk about this. Let me tell you about the interview today. So the interview that you're about to listen to is with myself and Karen Janowski. And Karen Janowski is one of the authors of Inclusive Learning 365, one of my co-authors. And Karen and I kind of do a little bit of a deep dive into literacy strategies for everybody. So it's not specific to AAC, but it's literacy in general. And this has been a big passion for her, for us in general. But this is something that she often presents on. And so we talk about literacy.
Chris, before we head into this interview, can you tell people how to get your book? Because I'm really excited about it, and I'm sure all of our listeners are. So how do people who are interested in this book get it?
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel, for bringing that up. The website is inclusive365.com. So inclusive365.com, and you can order there. There's links right there. It'll take you to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can order it from the ISTE website directly. And while you're there, you can also explore the website. And we have like a bunch of free content over there, like a whole webinar that we've done about it. You can see all sorts of resources that we share. So I don't know, go check it out, inclusive365.com.
I think it's really important for us, especially speech language pathologists. I know we have a lot of SLPs who listen who are very AAC focused. I've found in my own practice that the more I've opened up to this idea of inclusive strategies and even just the umbrella of assistive technology, like, wow, have I seen improvements in the way that I can coach and practice. Knowing these strategies is so important because we're working so closely with so many educators, and we're responsible for teaching. And so how can we help teachers help all kids? I feel like that is ultimately our goal. And we've talked about this on the podcast a little bit before, but teachers have the responsibility of their entire classroom, not just those kids that we're working with who have IEPs and communication goals. And so I've just found it really helpful, Chris, over the last couple of years of doing this podcast and becoming closer friends with you, of really increasing my understanding of inclusivity and strategies. And I'm really excited because this book does all of that. So I would highly recommend everybody go get it.
Yeah, that is something I've had frequent conversations about with SLPs. It's like, well, that's not my role. But if you choose this vision, if you have this shared vision, like everything I was just talking about towards the beginning, like where do I see this going? Where would I want to see this student end up? I'd want to see him fully included in a general education classroom. That's the end game for me, is seeing every student that uses AAC that's in a public education environment in an inclusive setting. And this book talks about strategies to get you there. So I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're saying there, Rachel. It's what I hope we are moving towards.
Okay, so without further ado, we're going to head into Chris's interview with Karen Janowski.
Great news, everybody. We're going to be presenting a pre-conference workshop for Closing the Gap called Designing and Delivering Empowering Experiences to Teach Language Using AAC.
This 6-hour virtual workshop takes place over 2 days, October 7th and 8th, from 1 to 4 p.m. Central Time on each day.
This interactive workshop explores strategies for teaching students of all ages language by engineering environments so all communicators have opportunities for rich, meaningful practice in the context of everyday routines.
Participants will get to explore how to design experiences using interactive technologies, which empower the student and their support network, putting them on the path to achieve their lifelong language goals.
During the workshop, we're going to take an in-depth look at building the skills of communication partners through structured training centered on both consulting and coaching.
We'll be sharing the latest tools and strategies for establishing a culture of language learning using AAC. Everybody loves engaging tools.
You can sign up now by going to bit.ly/designaac. That's bit.ly/designaac.
Can't wait to see you guys there.
Oh, and there's one more thing to mention, Rachel.
What's that, Chris?
I'm actually doing 2 pre-conferences on those days. I'll be presenting with the other authors of the new Inclusive Learning 365 book as well. The title of that pre-conference is Inclusive Learning 365, Breaking Down Barriers and Creating a Culture of Inclusivity by Design. That pre-conference is also on October 7th and October 8th, 2021, but it will be at 9 to 12 Central Time on those days. If you'd like to learn more about how to redesign educational experiences through an inclusive lens, then you can register for that pre-conference by going to bit.ly/inclusivectg. That's bit.ly/inclusivectg. Come spend the whole day with me. See you there. Welcome to the Talking with Tech podcast. My name is Chris Bouguet, and I'm here with my longtime colleague and friend, Karen Janowski. How you doing, Karen?
Hey, Chris, doing great. Although it is snowing here in Massachusetts on an April 16th day, which is a little depressing.
That is sad. And I'm sorry about that, but you're safe and warm in your home, in your office. Where are you right now?
Right now, I'm at my office. Really excited about chatting with you today about inclusive strategies, especially around literacy. Hot topic here.
Absolutely. And I know it's one that we are both passionate about. I've seen you present on it. We've had many conversations about it over the years. But before we go any further, let's do a quick introduction for the people who don't know who you are, who might be listening. This podcast, we feel like there's a lot of speech language pathologists, a lot of parents, other educators that might not be in the same sphere that you and I have lived in for a number of years,
Yeah, we can keep that a secret.
So give us your background. What's your when you're meeting somebody and you do an introduction, what do you tell people?
It's all about inclusive technology. I am an inclusive technology evangelist, zealot, proselytizer, whatever. It all started as when I was a school-based occupational therapist and realized the students with whom I was working were becoming dependent on the adults with whom they were working. And it was like, okay, there's some tools and strategies out there that can help promote independence. And so I looked into assistive technology, became an assistive technology consultant, and now I have a private practice north of Boston. So we do a lot of great work out in the greater Boston area.
Mm-hmm. And then in that span of time, since from your occupational therapy days in the school to being a private practice owner, I think you've done some other things on top of that, because I know you do presentations. You were an adjunct professor for a while. Is that right? Do I have your history right?
I was an adjunct at Simmons College here in Boston. I've done a lot of presentations locally, nationally. It's all about getting the word out and sharing what we know to really help reach every learner.
And now you're an ISTE author.
Thanks to you, Chris. Great opportunity, and it was wonderful to be able to co-write this fantastic book with you that we hope becomes the biggest seller for the ISTE publication.
You know that we've had many conversations about this as we were building that book together, and I have no doubt that it's going to be, at the top of the charts there, because I think it's going to be really powerful for a lot of people, and I think the word will spread.
I think so too. One of the things that we do want to help educators understand is very often they don't know what they don't know. And so I'm hoping that we can really spread the word, especially to the gen ed educators, because they're the ones that really have such an impact in reaching every learner in their classroom. So, and in ensuring that there are inclusive strategies that reach everyone. So we really want to target the general education audience, because we've had conversations as well about, let's not call it special ed anymore. Let's just call it inclusive education. Let's just call it education.
Yeah.
Same thing with technology. Let's not call it assistive technology. Let's just call it technology that reaches all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that these are the times that we're going to make those movements and make strides in that direction. So let's talk about one of the sections of the book is all about reading, and then another section is all about writing. And we have a number of strategies in there. But like you said, there's a bunch of teachers that don't know what they don't know, right? And so even before we talk about strategies, let's talk about some mindset shifts. So, you and I, oftentimes when we do presentations, I wonder if you feel this way. Sometimes I feel like I'm in the wrong room. Like the people there, like they're nodding, they're like, yeah, we get it. Yep, we know. We and it's like, yeah, how do we get those general education teachers? So what are some mindset shifts? What do you think are some things that you would wish would happen in a general ed environment that you wish they knew or wish they would change about the practice?
There's a few things. One of them is the responsibility that every learner in their classroom is their responsibility. If it's a student on an IEP or a 504 or a multilingual learner who's getting support from an ELL teacher, I mean, that they are responsible for every learner in their classroom, and to partner with the whole team so that we can, work collaboratively to meet every need. I think that's one of the things that I see is like, oh no, no, that's their issue. They go out for special ed, that sort of thing. That's another thing too. When we think about the instructional tools and methods and ways that teachers are asking students to demonstrate their knowledge, we again want to help educators have that paradigm shift of ensuring that everything that they use is inclusive. It does reach everyone. And you and I have had many conversations about worksheets. I think a worksheet is a classic example of a instructional output method that is incredibly limiting and interferes with success and independence for many learners. In fact, as for years, I would get so many referrals around written expression because kids would just have meltdowns when it came to those paper and pencil tasks. And so just rethinking and reflecting on, are my instructional methods and the ways that I'm asking learners to demonstrate what they know, are they inclusive methods that allow every learner to be successful and independent? That whole mind shift from it's my responsibility, to I want to ensure that everyone has what they need.
Now, one of the things you started off there with was that that sort of mentality that those are someone else's kids or someone else's problem. And sure, they're invited to come in every once in a while, but they're sort of like a glom on to my classroom, that, as opposed to they're an integral part of the classroom, and I've designed the instruction with them in mind. And I think one important, and we kind of emphasize in the book, is one important aspect is the language we use. And so right there, it could be pronouns, right? Are you calling them your kids and my kids, or are you calling them kids? You know what I mean? Or they're all our kids, in the same vein is that everyone's a general ed student first, or like I said, they're just a student. If we stop putting them into the buckets of special ed and general ed and just thought of them as ed, we wouldn't have those sorts of barriers.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, language and vocabulary do matter. And that kind of might segue us into what do we do about literacy, because that's all about the ability to read and write. And what are some of the inclusive ways that we really want to make sure that we are reaching all of our learners and using that inclusive language and using those inclusive strategies?
Well, you started there with some strategies, some educational strategies that were just been sort of legacy. Like this is what do you call it? You have a great acronym. This is the
TWADI.
TWADI.
That's the way we've always done it. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, a paradigm shift. Recognizing that that's the way we've always done it oftentimes is an obstacle for many learners. And it's all about thinking creatively, thinking innovatively. We talk about mindset and we talk about expecting our learners to have a growth mindset because we realize that fixed mindset interferes with their ability to make progress as a learner. I think we also want to help educators adopt a growth mindset for themselves too, especially if they're comfortable with, well, that's the way I've always done it. It's always worked. It doesn't reach every learner if we're really honest about reflecting on what we're doing in our classrooms.
Mm-hmm. Now, so you mentioned a strategy that has been used that we're saying sort of, let's stop using that strategy. And you mentioned worksheets, right? And that's a perfect example of something maybe we could stop doing, but we've just always done it that way. There will be some people that profess in the kind of the world of UDL But yeah, you still need worksheets because there's some kids that maybe do like them. What do you say to people that say that? Like, well, I was a kid that really liked worksheets. I liked doing them. I felt really successful, Do we say throw out the worksheets, don't do them anymore? Or do we say worksheets are okay as an option? Let's not force everybody to do worksheets. Where do you come down on that?
It is all about choice. And I do often hear that pushback. Well, I really do like paper and pencil, and some learners really do prefer paper and pencil. And it is always about choice, giving options and empowering learners to choose what works best for them. And sometimes it's helping them identify, well, I might feel more comfortable with paper and pencil because my keyboarding skills aren't great. But let me work on those keyboarding skills because I realize that I can do so much more when I have a mistake-tolerant medium like keyboarding, or when I can use spell check and some of those other features that can help improve the quality of my writing. And there's a great meme that I show a lot of times in my presentations. It says, it's a picture of two students, and one of them is saying, "Give me more worksheets," says no student ever.
Yeah.
And I think, and the other thing too, is we talk about evidence-based, research-based instructional methods. Where is the evidence that supports worksheets as an effective instructional tool?
I don't know. I have never seen it.
I haven't seen it either. And so again, when we talk about, some kids do better paper pencil. Okay, fine. Paper pencil, but it doesn't have to be a worksheet. Maybe they're just taking notes, but again, just allow them to recognize what work and identify what works the most effectively, depending on the task they're being asked to do, which also is another paradigm shift too. When we think about what we're asking learners to do, are we asking them to do things that have meaning? There's a difference between meaningful tasks that can help ensure that students are understanding what they're learning, but there's also, we got to be realistic, we got to be honest. Sometimes it's just busy work. Mm-hmm. And so it's always important to evaluate, what is it that I'm asking my learners to do? And would I want to do that? Would I want to do what I've asked my learner, what I've assigned to my learners? Would I want to do that if I was in my own classroom? So just that whole, there's a lot of paradigm shifts in thinking. And so I'm really excited that our book helps educators move along in that process of changing their thinking, adopting a growth mindset, recognizing that there's learner variability in every classroom.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that really means, like, if we were going to try and design a classroom and have, like, with that learner variability in mind, how do we do that? Like, what do we present the same materials to everybody, or do we provide some sort of structure where people get choice in the way they attack their learning?
It's always about choice. Universal design, it's all about designing universally, designing well in a way that offers learners choices. And I think one of the things that one of the points I would love to make in this, during this podcast, Chris, is the whole point around reading and the importance of self-selected reading. Stephen Krashen, who's a professor emeritus, I think at Stanford, on literacy, he has made the point of self-selected reading is often a best indicator of reading success. And so when we think about choices, empowering students to choose what interests them in terms of their reading and get engaged by, I think that that's a really empowering option as well. So, that self-selected reading is choice. So having a library filled with books that reflect the learners in the classroom. It could be, does it reflect different cultures? Does it reflect different abilities? What is reflected in the classroom library? And then we can help our learners identify what is really exciting to them to read about. Some kids prefer fiction. Some kids prefer nonfiction. It's all good. Mm-hmm. And there's a great tool that I often recommend to educators. It's a reading mindset tool, and it helps learners identify what they are interested in learning about and reading about, and as well as helping the educators as well. And it's completely accessible. It is students answer with emojis. The questions can be read to them so that even if you have a non-reader or a non-writer, they can still be successful with completing this reading mindset. And that's the type of inclusive tool that we really want to ensure all learners and educators have access to.
So you see me smiling here, right? Couple things to mention. First of all, that idea of self-selected reading, that was on the forefront of my mind because I am rereading Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver's book, Comprehensive Literacy for All. And it's right in chapter 6. That's exactly what they say for students with significant cognitive impairments, right? So like self-selected reading across the spectrum, just let kids read what they want to read.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of it because I'm a big comic book nerd and fan. My daughter is in 6th grade and loves manga, and the idea of putting pictures in a graphic novel sort of way really speaks to her, and she reads so much more than if she was if there were no pictures, if it was just prose. I mean, she likes those books too, but she just totally dives into it, and I can see the excitement around it as opposed to the forcing you to read a thing that you don't really want to read or have any interest in, and it just drives the love of learning right out the window.
Yes.
The other reason I was smiling, Karen, is because that self-selecting tool that you're mentioning, at the time of this podcast, we were doing our final edits of the book, and we broke up the sections saying, okay, Karen, you read these sections, and Chris, you read these sections, and just we'll do a last minute, proofread.
Yes.
And I think that strategy that you're talking about is like strategy number 1. Like, I think it's like when you turn and you read the first strategy in the book, it's that one.
Yeah, it's a great one. And we really want to, I guess you brought up about your daughter. One of the things that one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this is because my own son is dyslexic, and when he graduated from high school, he said, I will never read another book. Mm-hmm. And I had a 6th grader once tell me, oh, I hate reading. And even this week, in an IEP meeting, a 2nd grader was already so discouraged about reading and said he hated school. And so you and I were both passionate about breaking those mindset, breaking those perceptions of themselves as learners. We want every learner to get excited about learning, to see that they can potentially be an engaged, enthusiastic, lifelong learner. And that means we have to model that as well. So I want to break those cycles. I want to break those self-fulfilling prophecies. And so identifying that reading mindset, let's go with what interests you. I think the same thing can be true for writing as well, because many students, the written expression is an obstacle, and especially a blank page. But if you can get them to start with something that they are excited about, that they know well, no matter what the topic, you can start with that kind of mindset, and then it'll just flow. And again, the other thing to think about with writing is it doesn't have to be a paper and pencil or a keyboarding tool. Writing can be voice. Writing can be voice typing. Again, we talk about options. There are many options. There's alternative pencils for students with more complex special needs. There's so many options beyond the typical tools that we think about when it comes to written expression.
Well, and you had mentioned earlier, especially when it comes to writing, but that idea of busy work, like, am I doing something that's really meaningful and contributing to the world, or something that I'm passionate about? Well, that's one reason to read, right? Is because I want to learn more about something. I want to be compassionate. I've already have an interest, and I want to explore that interest deeper. And the same thing goes with writing, is that, okay, am I writing just for the teacher to read it? Maybe that's okay with a grander scheme in mind. Like, can you read this over and give me, because I want to get better because I need to write to these people and change their mind, or I need to write to these people and request money for this cause that I'm working in, or I need to whatever, give feedback on the book that I read, because I really love this genre and I want to share it with the world. It's writing for some sort of authentic purpose, as opposed to do it because here's some sort of weird prompt that you're going to be asked to write some sort of nebulous thing that only one teacher's ever going to read, give you feedback on. It's just not, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Rushton Hurley once said, let me remember if I can paraphrase this well. He said that learners, when they're writing for an audience of one, they want it to be good. They want it to be okay. But when they're writing for an audience of many, they really do want it to be great. And that's another thing to keep in mind when we think about publishing online and all of the opportunities that are available that way. Learners are more invested in the quality of the product when they know that they are writing it for a larger audience. And like you just said, that they could even be making a difference. They could be persuasively arguing for a point of view in their community to make a change in there. Because that's another thing too. Learners do want to make a difference. They want to make an impact. And so there's so much potential. And that's why literacy is so important, because being able to read and write for purpose and for intention in making a difference. So those underlying literacy skills are so important to build as foundational skills, no matter what the ability level is.
When I first met you, Karen, and we would see each other at ATIA. I don't know if you remember this or not, but we would, I can distinctly remember sometimes like shouldering up next to you or you coming up next to me, saying hi to each other. And then you always had this kind of classic question that you would ask me every time you would see me. And I thought, maybe does she ask everybody or does she just ask me this question? But I'm going to ask you now on the podcast. You would always ask, so what's your new tool? What's something interesting that you're learning about? What's some new, not really strategy, it was really about the tool in this case. You would always ask, what's the latest website? What's the latest software? What's something that's got you excited? So I'm going to ask you that. We've talked, the majority of our time right here has been talking about changing your mindset, some specific strategies you can use. But now let's talk specifically about some tools that's got you jazzed.
So having to do with literacy?
Definitely.
Is that what the topic is? Oh, there's so many. I think if we're talking specifically about a tool, and that's that second grader who I worked with this week. In fact, I felt like it was a crisis. Okay, I got to work with this kid immediately because he hates school and we've got to break that cycle. So it's not a new tool, but it is, to me, one of the most universally designed tools out there. And there are several, but Book Creator, I think, is one of the best universally designed tools, and they keep adding new fantastic features. And so in terms of written composition, free writing, graphic novels, in terms of access to text, teachers could create books using Book Creator and it can be a collaborative experience. The whole classroom can work together. There's just so much to it. They have an auto draw so that you can draw something that looks somewhat like what you want it to, and then it will automatically correct. They also, if you do an audio recording, because the ability to bypass output challenges through audio is such a empowering option for many of our learners. And they have audio. If you do an audio recording, they even have an audio transcription feature for the students who cannot hear the text. They may be deaf or hard of hearing. They have an audio transcription feature built in. If you embed a video, it automatically will close caption again for the deaf or hearing impaired. There's so much that's possible. And so I showed this tool to that student who already hates school. And he was so excited about it. He was thinking about he's into Minecraft and some of the books that he could write about Minecraft. And when we were done, he said to me, and I posted this on Twitter, because these are the kinds of things, this is why we do what we do. He said, I love working with you. It was the other thing he didn't go to school that day because he had needed a mental health day, and I wasn't told ahead of time. So I went to the school to work with him and was told, well, he's not here today. And so I happened to call the family and I said, let's reschedule. And they said, oh, wait a second. He wants to come see you. He forgot. We're coming right down. It was so wonderful. Those are the kinds of differences universally designed, well-designed technology can offer for learners. Mm-hmm. And so he is reframing. He's dyslexic. He's got significant input and output issues, but he's so bright and he has so much to contribute. He told me this particular student told me when I asked him, what are you interested in? He said, I love to talk. And he does. Let's work on those verbal strengths. That's the other part too, Chris, and I know that you and I are in agreement about this. We always want to start from a position of strength. What are the strengths of our learners? So in identifying the reading mindset, we can also identify what are you interested in? What do you love? What are your strengths? And work from a basis of strength.
Well, we mentioned this in the book too, that one of the shifts in mindset is a learner perspective, a learner-centered approach, as opposed to a teacher-centered approach or a system approach. So that what you're talking about there is, learning about a student, learning about what drives them, and the educator role becomes more of a guide about how they can achieve their own goal, their own learning goals, as opposed to this is what we do in second grade. Everyone must do the exact same thing. Well, I hate that.
Yeah.
I bet this kid, not knowing him at all, but I bet he's one of the kids that was like, pandemic, I don't have to go to that place. And he's fist pumping and super happy about not having to go to school. And that is, right. Again, we're shoving the joy of learning right out the window. And I see that happen sometimes, in distance learning as well. Kids kind of sitting there listening to teachers drone on during a video conference, as opposed to making it. And I don't want to sound like the teachers need to do some sort of circus act to get the kids engaged. It doesn't have to be that. It can just be asking the kids, learning about the kids, and drawing out their strengths and what their passions.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be hard either. I mean, I think one of the things that you think about is it's not reactive, it's proactive. So you design your learning experiences with universality and inclusiveness right from the start. And then once you've got them, they're always there, and you can build on them, and you can get feedback from the learners in the classroom. What really worked? I think that's another part when we think about learner-centric. We want to always get our learners reflective as well, because we want to help them identify what works best for me. What do I get excited about when it comes to learning, and then building off of those types of realities. It's part of developing executive function skills, which is another unit in our book, is helping facilitating reflection and helping learners identify what works best for them, and identifying those strategies, and then advocating for them if they, this really works for me. Can I try this out? So, but getting back to literacy, and I think one of the most important points that I want to make sure that we make in this podcast is the whole role of audio supports. And just because a learner can't access independently grade level content, cannot decode with fluency, doesn't mean that we have to change the curriculum to modify it. Instead, we can empower them with those technology resources that help them to independently access grade level content. I've been to too many IEP meetings, and I'll say, the student may be a middle school student, and I'll say, how do they access grade level content? Because they're reading maybe 3 years below grade level. And they say, oh, it's not a problem. We read it to them. And I say, okay, but what do you do? What does the learner do when you're not there to read it to them? What if they need you to read it over again? Are they going to ask you to reread it because they didn't quite get it? Mm-hmm. They're very reluctant to do those things. So let's show them what's possible and give them the option so that they can be empowered to be independent and successful on their own, and move away from prompt dependency, which, again, I see that all too often.
So let's talk about the having text read out loud for a second. In order to have some text read out loud, no, let me change that. In order to have text read out loud, that means text needs to be able to be read out loud by the software, by the tool that they're using. And so that's something, a very practical step that teachers could take when they're selecting materials, is to say, well, is the play button, can I hit a play button and can I listen to it? If so, okay, that's something that I might choose. If not, then maybe I should look for something that would allow that functionality. Is that fair? Is that fair?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially in 2021, there are so many options for accessible text. I'm sure that you have seen teachers have made copies of materials that they have used in the past, and they're copies of copies, and impossible for even a fluent reader to decode because it's just so poorly copied. There's so much more that's available in a digital electronic format that can have a voice attached to it. And I sometimes call some of the choices that we make as educators educational malpractice, when we are putting that kind of an obstacle in the way of a learner, making it impossible for them to independently access content. We've got to do whatever it takes to reach every learner.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've had good success with teachers. Once I point that out to them, they'll say, oh, well, okay, teach me. I'll convert my materials, or I'll change my materials. Do you find that same thing? Like, once it's pointed out, I find there's a scant few. There's still always a few, but there's a scant few that are like, what? No, that's cheating, or that's that they have to just tough it out. In the same vein, like they need to just squint rather than give them glasses.
Right. Yeah, that's always a good method. If someone if there is an educator objecting, and if they're wearing glasses, you can just say, can I borrow them, and then give you this to read. I do think that is one of the benefits of the pandemic, is it did help educators move forward in terms of their technology implementation and integration. They now did have to think more inclusively in terms of ensuring that the materials were available in an online format for the remote learning, for the hybrid learning. I still, unfortunately, did see packets being sent home as well, mm-hmm. or parents being asked can you please print this? And that leads me to another option, another tool that I think is so beautifully inclusively designed, and that is Seesaw. Especially at the elementary level, preschool, elementary level, because again, that audio feedback, educators can record their voice leaving audio directions, so that even if a learner is a non-reader, they can listen to the audio directions as many times as they need to. And then they can create all kinds of content through Seesaw, which is the other great thing about Book Creator too. When we think about removing the obstacles to learning, we also want to help our learners be content creators instead of just content consumers. And these kinds of tools promote that strategy of engagement in the learning through creating an artifact that demonstrates what they know and are excited about. Mm-hmm. So cool.
Well, and those things then can can go to become part of their portfolio of evidence of their own learning. So they can look back, and one avenue is to look back at their own learning and be like, remember this artifact at the beginning of the year? And now look at this, what you've created here at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Do you see how much you've grown? Because sometimes, students don't give themselves enough credit for how much progress they've made. But then that also could help us sort of diminish the importance of standardized testing. Could we look at these portfolios as an option?
Let's not go there.
Yeah.
But and again, the portfolio that's created in Seesaw, and there are other tools as well. Like you said, you can reflect back on the growth, but it's also a way to just kind of chronicle what did I really do well? It's also saving the things that you're most excited and proud about. And it's also a great way to involve family. I think that's another point, because you're a parent. When you ask your kids, how was school? Boring. What did you do? Nothing. But you use some of these inclusive tools. It's a starting place to really share about the learning that's happening, and things that the learner created that they can talk about it around the family dinner table. That's what we want. Also, those kinds of let's make learning such an exciting thing, and it should be anyway, that they go home and share with the family. This is what I did. Look at this, is so awesome. So yeah, there's so much that's possible.
So, Karen, this has been a great conversation. I don't want it to end. And I know people are going to be watching this and listening to this and going, man, that was cool. You're right. I mean, I want to learn more of these strategies. Well, we've got the book, but if for whatever reason, that's just one tool, it would be great. I'm going to suggest this to you. If you could maybe have some sort of weekly forum where people could participate together and, come together and ask questions and learn from another. If you could set that up, I think people would show up and participate in that. Would you do that for us?
I think that sounds like a great idea, Chris. I think the need is great. And I think it would be an incredible opportunity for educators to really, to just kind of share, learn, and experience that support. That's an awesome idea.
You don't think something like that already exists on Wednesday nights at 8:00 p.m., do you?
That's one of the things that the AT chat at 8:00. Yep. That's one on Twitter. That's one avenue, but I think that there's some possibilities for even more exciting options as well.
Oh, I
as
agree.
We think about moving forward with Inclusive Learning 365.
Yeah, so check out the book, Inclusive. Well, the website is inclusive365.com. The book is Inclusive Learning 365, EdTech Strategies for Every Day of the Year. And I don't know, any final thoughts here, Karen?
This has been so fun. And Chris, we really hope that this is a movement in education, in terms of just thinking automatically, inclusively, to reach all learners, and in a way that empowers them. And so, yeah, it's a movement and a paradigm shift, and really excited to be a part of this. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you.
Me too. Thank you for spending your time with us today for the Talking with Tech podcast. I'm Chris Bouguet with Karen Janowski, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Chris.